When a special education teacher notices a new transfer student who refuses to remove his oversized black hoodie, despite the sweltering classroom heat, something about his vacant expression and physical wincing begins to haunt her. What began as a simple concern over dress code would soon uncover a horrifying case of exploitation that had been overlooked by multiple systems for years. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you believe that sometimes the most alarming discoveries can lead to the greatest healing, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that matter. She couldn't have known that her insistence on helping this silently suffering child would thrust her into the heart of a criminal investigation, until she found the first sign of something unimaginable that changed everything. Melanie Prescott had been teaching in the special education department at Riverdale Middle School for 5 years. At 34, her patient demeanor and fierce advocacy for her students had earned her both the respect of her colleagues and the trust of even the most challenging children in her care. With her dark hair typically gathered into a practical ponytail and intelligent eyes that missed very little, Ms. Prescott, Ms. P, to her students, created a classroom environment where children with various learning differences and emotional needs felt safe and understood. She believed deeply that every student had potential that just needed the right environment to flourish. Her resource room was a thoughtfully organized space, with clearly defined work areas, sensory stations, and calming corners where overwhelmed students could regulate their emotions. The walls featured student accomplishments rather than store-bought motivational posters, and fidget tools were readily available on every desk. Melanie had designed the room based on years of observation and research on creating optimal learning environments for students with diverse needs. The administration often brought visitors to see her classroom as a model for effective special education practices. Melanie lived alone in a small bungalow about 20 minutes from the school, sharing the space with her rescue dog, Cooper, a gentle golden retriever mix who occasionally joined her at school as a therapy dog. She'd moved to Riverdale 7 years earlier after completing her master's degree in special education, drawn by the district's reputation for progressive practices. Though unmarried with no children of her own, Melanie had built a fulfilling life centered around her career and the close-knit community of educators and friends she'd cultivated. Principal James Thornton valued Melanie's expertise and often sought her input on school-wide policies affecting vulnerable students. "You see these kids differently," he had told her during a recent evaluation meeting. "You look past the behaviors to find the causes, and that's why you connect with students others find unreachable." Melanie had accepted the compliment with a modest nod, though privately she believed she was simply doing what any dedicated teacher should, treating each child as an individual worthy of understanding. School psychologist Dr. Rachel Goldman had become Melanie's closest ally at Riverdale. They frequently collaborated on student intervention plans and behavior supports. Rachel appreciated Melanie's practical classroom insights, which complemented her own clinical perspective. "You catch the subtle cues I sometimes miss," Rachel had commented during a recent case discussion. "The tiny changes in body language or tone that signal something's going on beneath the surface." There had been growing concerns at recent staff meetings about the increasing number of transfer students from Westside Community Group Home, a residential facility for children in the foster care system. Budget cuts at the state level had resulted in reduced staffing and oversight at many such facilities, and teachers had noticed that students arriving from Westside often had significant gaps in their academic records and concerning behavioral issues that suggested inadequate supervision and support. One Thursday afternoon in mid-September, Melanie had encountered a sharply dressed woman speaking with Principal Thornton in the hallway outside the resource room. The woman, who she later learned was Elaine Winters, the executive director of Westside, had offered Melanie a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. There was something calculating in her manner as she described the challenging populations her facility served and the necessary disciplinary structure they maintained. Something about the way she referred to the children in her care as cases, rather than individuals, had left Melanie with a lingering discomfort she couldn't quite articulate. Early autumn had settled over the small town of Riverdale, bringing cooler mornings but stubbornly warm afternoons that left the aging school building uncomfortably hot by midday. Riverdale Middle School, a utilitarian brick structure built in the 1970s, had an outdated HVAC system that struggled to maintain consistent temperatures throughout the building. In Melanie's corner classroom, Two large windows provided some relief when opened, but the September heat often lingered well into the afternoon hours, prompting most students to shed sweatshirts and jackets soon after arriving. It was during one such warm afternoon that Melanie first became truly concerned about Ethan Morris, a seventh grader who had transferred to Riverdale just 2 weeks earlier from West Side Group Home. The boy was of average height but noticeably thin, with a perpetually hunched posture that made him appear smaller than his 12 years. His file indicated a history of learning disabilities and behavioral concerns without specific details, noting only that he had been in the foster care system for approximately 3 years following family disruption due to parental incarceration. But nothing could prepare Melanie for the mystery that would unfold around Ethan's black hoodie. The first time Melanie really took notice was during a particularly warm Tuesday when the classroom thermostat read 81 degrees despite the open windows. Students were working in small groups on a reading project, most in short sleeves and still complaining about the heat. Ethan sat slightly apart from his assigned group, as he typically did, wearing the same oversized black hoodie he had worn every day since his arrival. The hood was pulled up despite repeated reminders about the school's no hoods indoors policy, and the sleeves extended well past his hands, which he kept tucked inside. "Ethan," Melanie had said quietly, approaching his desk, "it's really warm in here today. You might be more comfortable if you take off your hoodie for a while." The boy's reaction was surprisingly intense. His body stiffened. His already pale face seemed to lose more color, and his eyes, briefly visible beneath the hood, flashed with what looked unmistakably like fear before dropping to his desk. "I'm fine," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. "I get cold easily." Despite the obvious unlikelihood of anyone feeling cold in the overheated classroom, Melanie hadn't pushed the issue that day. In her experience, students with trauma histories sometimes develop strong attachments to certain clothing items that provided psychological comfort or a sense of security. She made a mental note to observe the pattern and potentially address it later when she'd built more trust with the withdrawn student. As September progressed, however, Ethan's insistence on wearing the hoodie in all circumstances became increasingly concerning. During physical education, he produced notes requesting exemption from class. During science labs where protective gear was required, he refused to remove the hoodie even when it posed a safety hazard with Bunsen burners. Most worrying was his physical discomfort. Melanie observed him wiping sweat from his forehead, shifting uncomfortably in his seat, and even swaying slightly during morning assembly, yet still refusing any suggestion to remove the heavy garment. "I'm getting concerned about the Morris boy," Melanie mentioned to Rachel during their weekly consultation meeting, about 3 weeks after Ethan had joined her class. The psychologist reviewed her notes. "Ethan? Minimal participation, significant academic gaps. No disciplinary issues, but essentially no social engagement either. What's concerning you specifically?" Melanie hesitated, aware that her worry might seem trivial. "It's about his hoodie. He wears the same black hoodie every day, regardless of temperature. It's clearly several sizes too large, and he keeps the hood up and sleeves covering his hands at all times. When I've suggested he might be more comfortable without it, he becomes visibly anxious." Rachel's expression grew thoughtful. "Could be a security object, especially given his foster placement. Many kids from disrupted homes develop strong attachments to specific items." "That was my initial thought too," Melanie agreed. "But this seems different from typical attachment behaviors. It's more like fear, like he's hiding something. And I've noticed he seems to be in physical discomfort some days. Wincing when he moves certain ways, holding himself very stiffly." Rachel made a note in her file. "That does raise some red flags. His records from West Side are remarkably sparse for a child who's been in their care for almost 2 years. I've requested more detailed information, but they're notoriously slow to respond." "There's something else," Melanie added, recalling a detail that had struck her as odd. "The hoodie itself, it's always immaculately clean. Most kids who fixate on a specific clothing item wear it constantly, but Ethan's looks freshly laundered every day, despite being worn in a hot classroom. That suggests someone is ensuring he has an identical clean one each morning." Rachel's expression sharpened with interest. "That is unusual." Multiple identical items suggests a level of planning that goes beyond typical security attachment. Have you been able to engage him one-on-one at all? I've tried, Melanie replied. He responds minimally to direct questions, avoids eye contact, and positions himself away from others whenever possible. Classic avoidance behaviors, but more extreme than I typically see even in trauma-affected students. Let me try to expedite those records, Rachel said. In the meantime, keep building that trust. If there is something concerning happening, you're the one he's most likely to eventually open up to. But nothing could have prepared Melanie for what she would discover the following week. The revelation came during an afternoon when Melanie was working with a small group of students, including Ethan, on a remedial math lesson. The resource room was particularly warm that day due to unexpected maintenance on the school's ventilation system. As the students worked through practice problems, Melanie noticed Ethan's handwriting becoming increasingly erratic, his movements sluggish. Then, without warning, he swayed in his chair and slumped forward, his forehead hitting the desk with a concerning thud. Ethan, Melanie was at his side immediately, while instructing another student to get the school nurse. The boy was conscious but disoriented, his face alarmingly flushed and hot to the touch. I think you're overheating. We need to cool you down. Through his daze, Ethan registered her reaching for his hoodie zipper and made a weak attempt to bat her hand away. No, he mumbled, the words slurring slightly. Not allowed. Get in trouble. Melanie's concern for his physical welfare overrode her usual respect for personal boundaries. Heat exhaustion could quickly become dangerous, and the heavy black hoodie was clearly exacerbating his condition. I need to help you cool down, Ethan. Just for a minute, okay? You're not in trouble. With gentle efficiency, she unzipped the hoodie, intending to remove just the outer layer while maintaining his dignity. What she saw in that brief moment caused her to gasp audibly, then stumble backward several steps before turning and running from the classroom, calling for help in a voice so distressed that teachers emerged from neighboring rooms in alarm. Rachel! Nurse Matthews! I need help now. The urgency in her voice brought both the school psychologist and nurse running toward the resource room, where they found Melanie in the hallway, visibly shaking. It's Ethan, she managed, her professional composure cracking. Under his hoodie. I've never seen anything like it. You need to see this. Back in the classroom, where confused students had gathered around their semi-conscious classmate, Nurse Matthews conducted a quick assessment before directing the other students to another classroom with a teaching assistant. Rachel remained with her while Melanie, having collected herself, returned to Ethan's side. The boy was more alert now but clearly frightened, clutching the edges of his unzipped hoodie closed. I'm sorry, he whispered. Please don't tell them I took it off. They'll hurt me worse. Ethan, Melanie said gently, kneeling beside him. We need to see under your hoodie to help you. No one here will hurt you, I promise. Can you show Nurse Matthews what's underneath? After a moment of visible internal struggle, the boy gave a small nod and slowly lowered the hoodie from his shoulders. What was revealed left all three adults momentarily speechless with horror. Beneath the hoodie, Ethan wore a thin t-shirt that did nothing to conceal the elaborate network of what appeared to be burns systematically covering his arms and torso. These were not random injuries but deliberate patterns, some fresh and angry red, others scarred over forming geometric designs and even what looked like symbols or letters across his skin. More disturbing were the small electronic devices attached to his upper arms with medical tape, with thin wires disappearing beneath his shirt. Oh my God! Nurse Matthews breathed, her clinical demeanor momentarily abandoned. Ethan, who did this to you? The boy's eyes darted to the door, as if expecting someone to appear. The night room, he whispered. At Westside, Mr. Keegan does the symbols. Says it's preparation. His voice dropped even lower. There are others. Some worse than me. Melanie felt physically ill as the implications became clear. These were not accidental injuries or even typical abuse patterns. This was systematic, ritualistic harm being inflicted on a child in state care, with indications of some organized purpose that chilled her to the core. The devices? Rachel asked carefully, her voice steady despite the shock visible in her eyes. "What are they for, Ethan?" "Tracking," the boy replied, his voice gaining a slight mechanical quality, as if reciting something often repeated to him. "So they always know where we are. And for discipline. If we tell anyone or try to remove them," he shuddered visibly. "It hurts really bad. They can turn it on from anywhere." Melanie exchanged glances with Rachel and the nurse, a silent agreement passing between them about the immediate steps needed. This was clearly not just abuse but something potentially much larger and more sinister. "Ethan," Melanie said gently, "we're going to help you. Right now, Nurse Matthews needs to check you medically, and then we need to call people who can make sure you're safe. Is that okay?" The fear that flashed across the boy's face was heartbreaking. "They said no one would believe me, that everyone works for them. The police, the doctors. They said they all know and don't care." It was Rachel who responded, her professional training evident in her calm, authoritative tone. "That's a lie. They told you to keep you afraid and silent. There are many, many people who will believe you and who don't work for them. I promise you that." The next hours unfolded in a carefully orchestrated sequence, following established protocols for severe abuse cases while adapting to the unusual elements of this situation. Principal Thornton contacted specialized law enforcement rather than local police, based on Rachel's concern about the systematic nature of the abuse and the electronic devices, which suggested organized criminal activity rather than individual maltreatment. Nurse Matthews arranged for Ethan to be transported to Children's Hospital's specialized trauma unit, bypassing the local medical center. Melanie was permitted to accompany him in the ambulance, having established the strongest connection with the boy. Throughout the journey, she maintained calm conversation about neutral topics, recognizing that Ethan was likely in shock and needed normalcy more than questions. At the hospital, a team trained in both trauma medicine and forensic evidence collection carefully documented Ethan's injuries and safely removed the electronic devices for analysis. Preliminary examination revealed they were indeed sophisticated tracking devices with remote-activated components capable of delivering electric shocks, a discovery that prompted immediate contact with federal authorities. When detectives from the FBI's Crimes Against Children unit arrived, they interviewed Ethan with extraordinary gentleness, with Melanie present as his advocate. What emerged from his hesitant disclosure was more disturbing than anyone had anticipated. Westside Community Group Home, under the direction of Elaine Winters and several staff members including a man known as Mr. Keegan, was operating as a front for a trafficking operation. Children in state care, already vulnerable and unlikely to be missed or believed, were being prepared for transport to buyers who had specific requirements, some for labor, others for much darker purposes. The pattern of burns on Ethan's body were both a form of psychological conditioning and a twisted form of branding to indicate his status and intended destination. "How many others are there at Westside now?" the lead detective asked, her voice professionally neutral despite the horror of what she was hearing. 12, Ethan replied, his voice stronger now that he realized he was being believed. "But only 7 of us go to the night room. The others are too little or too noticeable. Kids people might look for." The implication was clear: children with involved family members or distinctive characteristics that might draw attention were spared, while those deemed truly forgotten by society were exploited. The revelation spurred immediate action. Within hours, federal and state authorities had secured warrants and were conducting a coordinated raid on Westside Group Home. For Melanie, the days that followed were both emotionally draining and profoundly purposeful. She remained at the hospital with Ethan during his initial treatment, served as his advocate during interviews, and helped coordinate with victim services to ensure appropriate placement once he was medically cleared. The bond formed through crisis had created a trust that proved invaluable as the investigation expanded. "You were right to run screaming for help," Rachel told her during a brief moment of respite in the hospital cafeteria. "Your reaction probably saved more than just Ethan. If you tried to handle it quietly or through standard channels, they might have had time to move the other children or destroy evidence." Melanie nodded, still processing the magnitude of what had been uncovered. "I've never seen anything like those burns. The systematic nature of it. The devices. It was like something from a nightmare. That's exactly what it was for those children, Rachel replied soberly. A waking nightmare they had no way to escape, until you noticed what others missed. The raid on Westside had confirmed Ethan's account and uncovered even more disturbing evidence. 6 other children were found with similar markings and electronic monitoring devices. Computers seized from the facility contained encrypted communications with buyers both domestic and international, as well as detailed records of previous children who had passed through the operation, some of whom had been missing for years. Elaine Winters and 4 staff members, including the man identified as Keegan Richards, were taken into custody on multiple federal charges. The investigation quickly expanded to include financial crimes, as evidence suggested that government funding intended for legitimate foster care was being systematically diverted to support the trafficking operation. Most disturbingly, several officials within the state's child welfare system were implicated, having deliberately overlooked red flags at Westside in exchange for payments or other considerations. The corruption had allowed the operation to continue for years despite occasional concerns raised by teachers, medical professionals, or even law enforcement. For Ethan and the other rescued children, the path forward would be challenging but hopeful. They were placed in a specialized treatment facility with extensive security measures and trauma-informed care. Medical experts worked to address their physical injuries, while psychologists developed individualized therapy plans to begin addressing the profound psychological trauma they had endured. Melanie was granted special permission to visit Ethan regularly, providing a crucial connection to the wider world and a living reminder that his disclosure had led to rescue rather than the punishment he had been conditioned to expect. These visits became an anchor in his recovery process, gradually helping him rebuild trust in adults and institutions. "The other kids are safe too?" he asked during one such visit, about 2 weeks after his rescue. This had been his most consistent concern, even amid his own healing process. "Yes," Melanie assured him. "All safe, all getting help like you. And the investigation has identified some others who had already been sent away. Authorities are working to find them too." Ethan nodded, absorbing this information. "They told us no one would ever look for us, that we were the throwaway kids nobody wanted." The cruelty of that psychological manipulation, convincing already vulnerable children that their very existence was irrelevant to society, struck Melanie anew. "They lied about that, just like they lied about everything else," she said firmly. "There are people who have been looking for some of these kids for years, and there are many people working very hard right now to make sure all of you have safe, permanent homes where you'll be protected and valued." As summer approached, the legal proceedings against those involved in the West Side operation continued to expand, uncovering connections to similar operations in other states. The case had prompted a nationwide audit of group homes and foster care facilities, with new oversight protocols and inspection requirements being implemented at the federal level. Melanie had been asked to consult on developing training for educators about recognizing signs of trafficking and organized abuse, indicators that went beyond the typical markers of individual maltreatment that most mandated reporter training covered. Her experience with Ethan had highlighted how trafficking victims might present differently in educational settings, with specific patterns of behavior and concealment that required a trained eye to detect. By July, approximately 4 months after Melanie had unzipped Ethan's hoodie and discovered the horrifying truth, a significant breakthrough occurred in his case. Investigators had located his maternal aunt, Caroline Morris, who had been trying to gain custody of Ethan since his mother's incarceration 3 years earlier. Her efforts had been systematically obstructed by the corrupt officials now under indictment, who had falsified records to make her appear unsuitable while channeling Ethan into the West Side operation. "She's been looking for me this whole time?" Ethan asked when Melanie shared the news, his voice revealing both wonder and grief for what might have been. "Yes, and fighting for you," Melanie confirmed. "She never stopped trying to find you, even when the system told her you were placed in a closed adoption or moved out of state. All lies they told to keep her away." The reunion between Ethan and his aunt was carefully orchestrated with support from his treatment team. Caroline Morris, a stable, compassionate woman in her early 40s, had prepared extensively for this moment, working with therapists to understand Ethan's trauma and the specialized support he would need long-term. When Ethan entered the meeting room and saw his aunt for the first time in 3 years, something remarkable happened. A genuine smile transformed his face, cracking through the careful neutrality he typically maintained. "Aunt Caro?" he said, using a childhood nickname that confirmed his recognition. "You still have purple glasses." Caroline nodded, tears streaming down her face, as she restrained herself from rushing forward to embrace him, respecting the boundaries his therapists had emphasized. "I never changed them," she replied. "I wanted to make sure you'd recognize me when I found you." Their reconnection progressed gradually over the following weeks, with supervised visits extending in duration as Ethan's comfort increased. By August, his treatment team supported a transition plan for him to move into his aunt's home, with extensive outpatient services and support systems in place. "She's turned the second bedroom into a space just for me," Ethan told Melanie during what would be one of their final visits at the treatment facility, "with a desk for school and shelves for books. And she asked what colors I like instead of just deciding." These seemingly simple considerations, being consulted about preferences, having personal space, being offered choices, represented profound healing opportunities for a child who had been treated as property rather than a person for so long. "What color did you pick?" Melanie asked, noting how Ethan now wore short-sleeved shirts, the healing burns on his arms no longer hidden. His physical transformation was remarkable. Proper nutrition and medical care had filled out his once gaunt frame, and his posture had begun to straighten from its perpetual defensive hunch. "Blue and gray," he replied, "and she got me 3 different hoodies to choose from." He looked directly at Melanie then, a significant change from the averted gaze of their early interactions. "Normal ones that I can take off whenever I want. Nobody can make me wear them, and nobody can make me not wear them either." The significance of this simple statement, reclaiming autonomy over his own body and clothing after years of control and exploitation, brought tears to Melanie's eyes that she quickly blinked away. The transition to living with his aunt was supported by comprehensive services, including in-home therapy, educational specialists to address Ethan's academic gaps, and security measures to address the ongoing safety concerns until all members of the trafficking network were apprehended. Melanie remained connected as an educational consultant for his school placement, helping to design accommodations that would support his reintegration into a traditional classroom. 6 months after the day Melanie had unzipped Ethan's hoodie and discovered the horrifying truth, a ceremonial event was held marking the opening of the New Horizons Recovery Center, a specialized facility designed specifically for child survivors of trafficking and organized abuse. The center, funded through assets seized from those involved in the West Side operation, would provide comprehensive services including medical care, therapy, educational support, and family reunification assistance. Ethan, now living successfully with his aunt and beginning to attend a small private school with appropriate supports, had asked to speak at the opening ceremony. Though initially hesitant, his treatment team supported the request as a potentially empowering opportunity, with careful preparation and support. Standing at the podium, looking remarkably different from the withdrawn, hoodie-clad boy who had entered Melanie's classroom, Ethan spoke with quiet confidence to the assembled crowd of officials, advocates, and media. "For a long time, I thought being invisible was the safest thing," he began. "I thought if no one noticed me, maybe the bad things would stop, or at least not get worse. I was trained to believe that no one would help me even if they knew, that the whole world was in on what was happening to us." He paused, his gaze finding Melanie in the audience before continuing. "Then one day, my teacher noticed something wasn't right. She kept noticing, even when I tried to hide. When she finally saw what was happening to me and the other kids, she didn't just feel bad and do nothing. She ran screaming for help, literally screaming. People told me afterward." A small ripple of understanding laughter moved through the audience. "That scream was the first time I realized that what was happening to us could shock normal people, that it wasn't just the way the world worked. It was the first time I thought maybe there were more good adults than bad ones." His voice grew stronger. "Now I know that's true. For every bad person who hurt us, there have been 20 good ones working to help us heal." The ceremony concluded with the announcement of new legislation requiring enhanced background checks, oversight measures, and accountability structures for all facilities housing children in state care. The comprehensive bill had been named Ethan's Law in recognition of the boy, whose disclosure had exposed the systematic failures that allowed such exploitation to occur. As autumn returned to Riverdale, marking a full year since Ethan had first entered Melanie's classroom, she received a special invitation. Ethan and his aunt were hosting a small gathering to celebrate his 13th birthday, his first in a safe, permanent home with someone who genuinely cared for him. The modest house was decorated with blue and silver balloons, and a small group of carefully selected guests included his treatment team, 2 friends from his new school, and Melanie, Rachel, and Nurse Matthews, the 3 professionals who had been the first to respond to his crisis. Ethan himself answered the door when Melanie arrived, greeting her with a confidence that still sometimes caught her by surprise. He wore a gray zippered hoodie, casually unzipped over a graphic t-shirt, a simple fashion choice for any other teenage boy, but for Ethan, a profound statement of reclaimed normalcy. "Ms. P, come see what Aunt Caro got me for my birthday," he said, leading her into the living room where a new laptop computer sat on the coffee table. "It's for school, but also for the coding class I'm taking on Saturdays. I'm pretty good at it." As the small celebration progressed, Melanie observed the subtle but significant signs of Ethan's healing: his comfortable interaction with the limited number of guests, his easy acceptance of his aunt's affectionate gestures, his genuine enjoyment of the simple party foods and modest gifts. The physical scars from the burns would likely never completely fade, but the psychological healing was evident in every smile, every spontaneous comment, every moment of typical teenage behavior. Caroline joined Melanie in the kitchen as she helped arrange cupcakes on a plate. "We're doing well," she said, correctly interpreting Melanie's thoughtful observation of her nephew. "There are still tough days, nightmares sometimes. The trial next month will be challenging." The primary perpetrators were finally facing court proceedings, with Ethan expected to testify via closed-circuit television. "But he's resilient in ways I never imagined possible." "He always was," Melanie replied. "Even in his darkest moments, that resilience was there, just waiting for safety to allow it to flourish." Before the evening ended, Ethan approached Melanie with a small wrapped package. "I made this in art therapy," he explained as she carefully opened it. Inside was a handcrafted wooden box with an intricate design burned into the lid, the word courage, surrounded by symbolic images representing safety, growth, and healing. "It's beautiful," Melanie said, genuinely moved by the gift and its symbolic reclamation of the burning that had once been used to harm him. "Thank you, Ethan. My therapist says sometimes the most terrifying moments lead to the most important changes," he said thoughtfully. "Like when you unzipped my hoodie and ran out screaming. It was the scariest day of my life, but also the first day of everything getting better." Melanie smiled, remembering her uncharacteristic reaction, the shock that had overcome her professional composure and sent her running for help. "Sometimes a scream is exactly the right response," she said. As she prepared to leave, Ethan walked her to the door, pausing before opening it. "There's going to be a documentary about what happened," he said, "about West Side and the changes happening because of it. They want to interview me, but only my voice, no pictures. I think I'm going to do it." "That's a big decision," Melanie said carefully. "What made you consider saying yes?" "Because of the other kids," he replied without hesitation. "Not just the ones from West Side, but the ones still out there somewhere, wearing hoodies or scarves or whatever to hide what's happening to them. I want them to know that someone might notice, someone might help, even if they've been told nobody will." Recovery hadn't been instant for Ethan or the other children rescued from West Side. The physical wounds had healed more quickly than the psychological ones, though both left scars that would remain visible in various ways. But the foundation for safety had finally been laid, allowing the slow work of healing to begin. The systems, too, were changing: new laws, better oversight, enhanced training. Small but significant steps toward ensuring no child would remain hidden beneath a hoodie worn in fear rather than choice. As Melanie drove home that evening, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a simple observation about a student's clothing and led to systemic change affecting thousands of vulnerable children. Ethan now lived in a safe home with a loving guardian, was receiving appropriate educational and psychological support, and had begun to envision a future for himself, possibilities that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. In her classroom the next morning, Melanie watched her current students arrive, her trained eye automatically noting details: who seemed tired, who wore the same clothes as yesterday, who avoided eye contact. The vigilance that had led her to notice Ethan's distress had only sharpened through the experience. A professional hyper-awareness that balanced respect for privacy with responsible observation. On her desk sat the wooden box Ethan had created, a reminder that sometimes the most appropriate response to discovering horror is not calm professionalism but genuine human shock that spurs immediate action. Not an ending, but the tangible beginning of a journey toward healing that continues to unfold in ways that transform not just individual lives but entire systems designed to protect our most vulnerable children. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more. When a school counselor notices a 7-year-old boy who never removes his heavy winter jacket, even during indoor activities and warm weather, red flags start waving. Day after day, the child clings to that jacket like his life depends on it, becoming hysterical when anyone suggests he might be more comfortable without it. What was hidden beneath that innocent-looking piece of clothing would expose a nightmare that no child should ever endure. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below, and if you believe in protecting children who cannot protect themselves, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that matter. At first, Michael Harrison thought the boy was just attached to a comfort item, until he unzipped that jacket and uncovered the devastating truth that changed everything. Michael Harrison had been a school counselor for 14 years, and in that time, he developed an almost intuitive ability to spot children who were silently crying out for help. His office at Meadowbrook Elementary, located in a quiet corner of the building away from the busy hallways, had become a sanctuary for students dealing with everything from friendship conflicts to serious family trauma. The space was carefully designed to feel safe and welcoming. Soft lighting from table lamps rather than harsh fluorescence. Comfortable seating arranged in a circle rather than formal desk configurations, and walls decorated with inspirational artwork created by former students who had found healing within these walls. At 43, Michael brought a unique combination of educational psychology training and personal experience to his work. Before becoming a school counselor, he'd spent 6 years working as a child psychologist at the County Mental Health Center, where he'd specialized in trauma recovery and family therapy. His transition to school-based counseling had been motivated by a desire to catch problems earlier, to serve as a protective presence in children's daily lives rather than treating them only after crises had escalated beyond family and school resources. Michael's approach to counseling was grounded in building genuine relationships with students, understanding that children were most likely to disclose difficult truths to adults they trusted and felt safe with. His office reflected this philosophy. Instead of clinical furniture, he'd chosen warm, child-friendly pieces that encouraged relaxation and openness. A small refrigerator stocked with healthy snacks provided comfort to anxious children, while an extensive collection of art supplies, books, and therapeutic games offered multiple ways for students to express themselves when words felt too difficult or dangerous. The school itself served a diverse suburban community in Northern California, where families ranged from technology professionals earning 6-figure salaries to service workers struggling to afford basic housing in one of the country's most expensive regions. Michael had developed relationships with parents across this economic spectrum, understanding how different stressors, financial pressure, job insecurity, immigration status, mental health challenges, could all impact children's emotional well-being and academic performance. His caseload included students dealing with typical developmental challenges like social anxiety and academic pressure, as well as more serious situations involving family violence, substance abuse, and neglect. Michael's experience had taught him that childhood trauma often manifested in subtle behavioral changes that could be easily overlooked by busy adults, making careful observation and patient relationship building essential components of effective intervention. On this particular Wednesday morning in mid-February, Michael was reviewing his weekly schedule when he noticed 7-year-old Alex Thompson walking past his office window toward his second-grade classroom. What caught Michael's attention wasn't unusual in itself. Alex frequently passed by his office during morning arrival, but rather the way the child was dressed and moving. Despite the mild 68-degree weather that had prompted most students to wear light sweaters or t-shirts, Alex was bundled in a thick, dark blue winter jacket that appeared far too large for his small frame. This was the fourth consecutive week Michael had observed Alex wearing the same heavy jacket, regardless of indoor temperature or weather conditions. Even more concerning was the way Alex moved when wearing it, carefully, as if the jacket contained something fragile or painful that required protection from jarring movements. Alex Thompson had been on Michael's radar since early January, when his second-grade teacher, Mrs. Martinez, had requested a consultation about concerning changes in the boy's behavior and academic performance. Alex had previously been described as an outgoing, creative child who enjoyed participating in class discussions and collaborative learning activities. However, since returning from winter break, he had become increasingly withdrawn, reluctant to participate in group activities, and prone to what Mrs. Martinez described as extreme emotional reactions to minor stressors. "He used to be one of my most resilient students," Mrs. Martinez had explained during their January meeting. "If he made a mistake on an assignment, he'd erase it and try again with a smile. Now, if he makes even a small error, he becomes visibly distressed and sometimes starts crying uncontrollably." Michael had made note of these behavioral changes, understanding that significant shifts in children's emotional regulation often indicated changes in their home environments or personal circumstances that warranted careful monitoring and potential intervention. Alex came from what appeared to be a typical middle-class family. His father, David Thompson, worked as a software engineer for a local tech company, while his mother, Jennifer Thompson, was employed part-time as a graphic designer while completing her master's degree in education. On paper, the family seemed stable, no obvious financial difficulties, no previous involvement with social services, no documented history of domestic violence or substance abuse. However, Michael's training had taught him that family dysfunction and child abuse occurred across all demographic categories, and that professional success or community respectability could often mask serious problems occurring behind closed doors. His years of experience had shown him that some of the most severe cases of child abuse came from families that appeared perfectly normal to outside observers. During his lunch break, Michael decided to review Alex's file more thoroughly, looking for patterns that might explain the boy's recent behavioral changes and his obsessive attachment to the winter jacket. What he found was both limited and concerning. Alex's academic performance had declined significantly since January, dropping from above-average grades to barely meeting grade-level expectations. His attendance remained good, but several teachers had noted that he seemed tired and distracted during class, as if he weren't getting adequate sleep or nutrition. More significantly, Michael noticed that Alex had begun requesting to visit the nurse's office with increasing frequency. Complaints of headaches, stomach aches, and general fatigue that seemed to coincide with specific times of day and week. The pattern suggested that Alex's physical symptoms might be psychosomatic responses to emotional stress rather than genuine medical issues. Michael also reviewed comments from Alex's specialist teachers, art, music, and physical education, looking for additional perspectives on the child's behavior and interactions. What he found painted a concerning picture of increasing social isolation and physical discomfort. Alex's art teacher noted that he had stopped participating in messy projects like painting or clay work, claiming he didn't want to get his clothes dirty. His music teacher reported that Alex no longer wanted to play instruments or participate in movement activities, saying his arms and shoulders were too sore. Most telling, his PE teacher had documented multiple instances where Alex had requested to sit out of physical activities, always citing the need to keep his jacket on for warmth even when the gymnasium was clearly heated to comfortable temperatures. The cumulative evidence suggested that Alex was experiencing some form of physical discomfort or injury that he was attempting to conceal beneath his jacket. Michael's experience with abused children had taught him that constant clothing coverage often indicated visible injuries that children had been instructed to hide from adult observation. That afternoon, Michael decided to create an opportunity for private conversation with Alex, arranging for the boy to visit his office during the last period of the day for what he described to Mrs. Martinez as a routine check-in for students who've been experiencing some recent challenges. This timing would allow for extended conversation without disrupting Alex's academic schedule, while also providing privacy for sensitive discussions if they became necessary. At 2:45 p.m., a soft knock on his door announced Alex's arrival. Michael opened the door to find a small boy standing in the hallway with perfect posture. His hands stuffed deep into the pockets of his oversized winter jacket, despite the warm temperature in the building. "Hi, Alex," Michael greeted warmly, noting the child's immediate tension and the way his shoulders hunched defensively when addressed directly. "Thanks for coming by. I like to check in with all my students regularly to see how they're doing, and if there's anything I can help with." Alex entered the office with measured steps, his gaze quickly surveying the room as if cataloging potential exits or threats before settling into the chair Michael indicated. Throughout this process, Alex kept his jacket zipped completely closed and made no move to remove it, despite the office's comfortable temperature. "How are things going for you at school lately?" Michael asked, beginning with an open-ended question while observing Alex's body language and general demeanor. "Fine," Alex replied quietly, his voice carrying a flatness that seemed unusual for a typically energetic 7-year-old. "Everything's okay." Michael recognized the automatic response that many troubled children provided when asked about their well-being, a reflexive denial that often masked significant problems. "I'm glad to hear things feel okay." Sometimes when kids say everything's fine, they mean that some things are good and some things might be harder. "Are there any parts of school that feel challenging right now?" Alex considered the question for a moment before responding. "Sometimes I get tired during the day, and sometimes my body feels sore." The admission about physical discomfort provided an opening for Michael to explore further. "That sounds uncomfortable. What kinds of things make your body feel sore?" "Just regular things. Playing and stuff." Alex's explanation was vague and delivered with the same flat tone, suggesting either coaching about what to say or reluctance to provide specific details about his experiences. "I notice you've been wearing your jacket a lot lately, even when it's warm outside and inside the building," Michael observed gently. "That's a really nice jacket. It looks very warm and comfortable." The change in Alex was immediate and noticeable. His posture stiffened, his hands gripped the fabric of his jacket more tightly, and his breathing became slightly more rapid. "I get cold easily," he said quickly. "My dad says I need to stay warm so I don't get sick." Michael noted both the defensive response and the reference to his father's instructions about clothing. "It's great that your dad wants to make sure you stay healthy. Do you feel cold right now, even inside where it's heated?" Alex nodded, though Michael could see perspiration forming on the child's forehead, suggesting that he was actually overheated rather than cold. "I have to keep it on. Dad checks when I get home to make sure I've been wearing it all day." The daily inspection of Alex's clothing choices echoed patterns Michael had observed in other cases of parental control that extended beyond normal guidance into potentially abusive territory. Parents who required specific clothing compliance and verified adherence through daily checks were often exercising inappropriate levels of control over their children's bodies and choices. "Alex, can you tell me more about what happens when your dad checks your jacket?" Michael asked carefully, recognizing that he was approaching potentially sensitive territory. "He just makes sure I've been following the rules, that I haven't taken it off when I'm not supposed to." Alex's voice became even quieter, and Michael noticed that the child was avoiding eye contact. "What happens if you don't follow the clothing rules?" Alex's hesitation before answering was telling, and when he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "He gets disappointed, and he has to teach me lessons about listening and obeying rules." The euphemistic language, disappointed and teach lessons, was consistent with the terminology Michael had heard from other children who were being abused, but had been trained to describe violence in ways that minimized its severity or made it sound like normal parental discipline. "What kinds of lessons does your dad teach you?" Michael asked gently. "Lessons that help me remember better, so I won't forget important rules again." "Alex, can you help me understand what those lessons look like? Do they involve talking? Or are there other parts to the lessons?" The internal struggle playing out across Alex's young features was heartbreaking to witness. Michael could see the child's desire to tell the truth, warring against obvious fear of consequences for disclosure. Sometimes there's talking, Alex said slowly, but mostly there are other kinds of lessons. Physical lessons that help the rules stick in my memory better. Michael felt his pulse quicken while maintaining his calm, supportive demeanor. The phrase physical lessons was a clear euphemism for physical abuse, particularly when combined with Alex's obvious fear and the concealment behaviors he'd been displaying. Alex, I want you to know that children should never be hurt as a way of teaching them rules, Michael said firmly but gently. Good parents and teachers help children learn through kind words, clear explanations, and patience. Physical pain doesn't help children learn better. It actually makes learning harder. Alex looked up at Michael with surprise, as if this concept was completely foreign to his experience. But how else do kids learn to follow important rules if they don't get physical reminders? The question revealed the depth of psychological manipulation Alex had endured, conditioning that had convinced him that violence was not only normal but necessary for proper child development. This distorted understanding suggested that abuse had been occurring for an extended period and had been justified through twisted logic about child rearing and discipline. Children learn best when they feel safe and loved, Michael explained gently. When adults explain rules clearly, help children practice following them, and provide encouragement when children make good choices, fear and pain actually make it much harder for children to learn and remember things. Alex studied Michael's face intently, as if trying to determine whether this information could be trusted or if it represented some kind of test or trap. Really? Really? Michael confirmed with absolute conviction. Alex, I'm getting the feeling that someone might be using physical lessons to try to teach you rules, and I'm worried that those lessons might be hurting you. If that's happening, it's not your fault, and there are people who can help make sure you're safe. The tears that began forming in Alex's eyes confirmed Michael's suspicions, though the child fought to maintain his composure. I can't talk about family business, Alex whispered. Dad says what happens at home should stay private. That's true for most family matters, Michael agreed. But when someone is being hurt or scared, especially a child, that's when other adults need to step in to help. Telling trusted adults about someone hurting you isn't breaking family privacy. It's getting the help you deserve. What if I showed you something, but you promised not to tell him I showed you? Alex asked, his voice filled with desperate hope and terror. I can promise that I'll use any information you share with me to help you, not to get you in trouble, Michael replied carefully. But if someone is hurting you, I might need to involve other adults whose job it is to protect children. Would that be okay? After a long moment of internal struggle, Alex gave a tiny nod. With trembling fingers, he slowly began unzipping his winter jacket for the first time in weeks. What Michael saw when Alex's jacket fell open made him gasp involuntarily, a reaction he immediately tried to suppress for the child's sake. Alex's arms, visible through his thin t-shirt underneath, were covered with bruises in various stages of healing. Dark purple marks that appeared fresh were mixed with yellow and green bruises that suggested ongoing, systematic abuse over an extended period. Most disturbing were what appeared to be grip marks on Alex's upper arms, suggesting he had been grabbed and shaken violently. "Oh, Alex," Michael breathed, his voice thick with emotion and barely controlled anger. "Who did this to you? Tell me the truth. All of it." "My dad?" Alex whispered, tears streaming down his face as he finally spoke the truth he'd been forced to hide for months. "When I break rules or when I don't do things right the first time. He says it's the only way to help me remember and be a good kid." Michael's hands shook slightly as he documented the evidence with his phone's camera, photographing the systematic abuse while providing gentle reassurance to Alex. The pattern and severity of bruising indicated regular, escalating violence that had been carefully concealed beneath the heavy jacket. "How long has this been happening, Alex?" "Since Christmas vacation. Dad got a new job that's more stressful, and he says I need to be extra good now so I don't make his life harder. But I keep making mistakes, so the lessons have to be stronger to help me learn." The timeline and escalation pattern confirmed Michael's worst fears. Alex had been suffering systematic abuse for nearly 2 months, with his father using increasingly severe violence when previous abuse failed to achieve the impossible goal of perfect childhood behavior. What about these bruises on your arms? When did those happen? Last night. I spilled some milk at dinner and got it on the table. Dad said I needed a serious lesson about being careful with other people's property. The trivial nature of the triggering incident, a completely normal childhood accident that would be easily cleaned up in any reasonable household, contrasted horrifically with the severe abuse Alex had endured. This disproportion between minor mistakes and extreme consequences was characteristic of abusive environments where violence served the abuser's psychological needs rather than any legitimate disciplinary purpose. Alex, what your father is doing is very wrong, Michael said firmly, his voice carrying absolute conviction despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm his professional composure. No child should ever be hurt like this, no matter what they've done or how stressed an adult is feeling. This is not teaching. This is abuse, and it's against the law. Will I get in trouble for telling? Alex asked, his voice filled with the same terror Michael had heard from countless other young victims. You will absolutely not get in trouble for telling the truth, Michael assured him. You're being incredibly brave right now, and that bravery is going to help make sure you're safe from now on. The next several hours unfolded with the practiced efficiency Michael had developed through his previous experience with child abuse cases. He immediately contacted Child Protective Services, emphasizing the severity and systematic nature of the abuse Alex had endured. The physical evidence of ongoing violence, combined with the psychological manipulation and concealment patterns, required immediate intervention rather than routine investigation. Michael then called the police department's specialized child abuse unit, knowing that the criminal nature of Alex's injuries would require law enforcement involvement. He also contacted the school principal, Dr. Wilson, to ensure that Alex would remain under protective supervision until authorities could implement a comprehensive safety plan. Alex remained in Michael's office under his direct care while authorities responded, his emotional state fluctuating between relief at finally telling the truth and terror about potential consequences. Michael provided ongoing emotional support while completing detailed documentation that would serve as crucial evidence in both criminal proceedings and custody determination. Detective Lisa Park arrived first, her specialized training in child abuse cases and gentle manner immediately helping to put Alex more at ease than he'd appeared during Michael's entire acquaintance with him. Detective Park had worked with Michael on previous cases and understood the delicate balance required to gather necessary information while protecting the child's emotional well-being. "Hi, Alex," Detective Park said softly, settling into a chair positioned at the boy's eye level. "Mr. Harrison told me you've been very brave today by telling the truth about someone who has been hurting you. I'm here because it's my job to make sure children are safe, and I need to ask you some questions about what's been happening at home." While Alex provided his account of the abuse, describing months of escalating violence disguised as discipline, systematic physical punishment for minor childhood infractions, and psychological manipulation designed to convince him that he deserved the treatment he received, Michael completed increasingly detailed documentation and coordinated with the appropriate agencies. Alex's disclosure revealed abuse that extended far beyond the visible bruising on his arms. He described being grabbed and shaken violently when his father determined he wasn't listening carefully enough, being forced to stand in stress positions for hours as punishment for making noise, and being struck with various objects when his household chores didn't meet impossible standards. Most heartbreakingly, Alex revealed that his father had convinced him that his mother was unaware of the discipline sessions and that telling her would cause her to become sick with stress and disappointment. This psychological manipulation had isolated Alex from his mother's potential protection while creating additional guilt about his suffering. "You've been incredibly brave telling us all of this," Detective Park assured Alex when the interview concluded. "Because you told us the truth, we can make sure your father never hurts you again, and we can help your mother understand what's really been happening." Child Protective Services caseworker Robert Kim arrived shortly after the police interview concluded, bringing with him the authority and paperwork necessary to immediately remove Alex from his father's custody. His experience with emergency placements helped him explain to Alex what would happen next in terms the child could understand while providing reassurance about his immediate safety. "Alex, you're not going home with your father today, or ever again unless we can make sure you'll be completely safe," Robert explained gently. We're going to find you a safe place to stay with people who know how to take care of children who have been hurt. And we're going to help your mother understand what happened so she can make good choices about protecting you. Where will I go? Alex asked, this question carrying both hope and understandable anxiety about yet another major change in his young life. I have a family in mind who specializes in caring for children in situations exactly like yours, Robert replied. Their names are Tom and Sarah Collins, and they've been helping children for many years. They understand how to help kids feel safe again after they've been hurt by adults who were supposed to protect them. By evening, Alex found himself in the home of Tom and Sarah Collins, experienced therapeutic foster parents who had been caring for traumatized children for over 13 years. Their warm, child-centered home had been specifically designed to provide comfort and safety for children recovering from abuse, featuring calming colors, natural lighting, and carefully chosen furnishings that created an atmosphere of healing rather than institutional care. We're so happy to meet you, Alex, Sarah said gently as she knelt down to Alex's eye level in their living room. We know today has been really scary and confusing, but you don't have to be afraid anymore. Our job is to help you feel safe and happy, while other adults make sure you never have to be hurt again. Alex, now wearing a comfortable t-shirt provided by the foster family instead of his constraining winter jacket, looked around the unfamiliar environment with cautious wonder. The house felt different from any place he'd ever lived, warm instead of tense, welcoming instead of threatening, filled with evidence of children who had been allowed to make age-appropriate messes and express themselves freely. Do I have to follow special rules? Alex asked quietly, this question revealing how his entire life experience had been shaped by arbitrary, punitive regulations designed to control rather than guide normal childhood development. Just gentle house rules that help families live together happily, Tom replied with a warm smile, settling into a nearby chair so their conversation could continue at Alex's eye level. Things like being kind to each other, letting us know if you need anything, and understanding that everyone makes mistakes sometimes. We want you to feel comfortable here. What if I accidentally spill something or break something? Alex asked, this question carrying the weight of months of conditioning that had taught him to fear normal childhood accidents. The question broke both foster parents' hearts, but Sarah answered with steady warmth and absolute conviction. Accidents happen to everyone, especially when people are learning new things or adjusting to new places. When accidents happen, we clean them up together and maybe talk about how to prevent similar accidents in the future. No one ever gets hurt in this house for making mistakes. That's a promise. Alex's eyes widened at this revolutionary concept, the idea that accidents could be learning opportunities rather than crimes requiring violent punishment. Over the following days, Alex began the gradual process of learning to live without constant fear, though his healing would clearly require extensive time and professional support. The Collins family, trained in trauma-informed care and experienced with children recovering from severe abuse, provided structure without rigidity, offering Alex choices he'd never been allowed to make while maintaining the consistency and security he needed to begin trusting again. Michael visited daily, both to monitor Alex's emotional recovery and to witness the child's remarkable transformation. Within the first week, Alex was speaking more naturally, without the careful self-monitoring that had characterized his communication before. He laughed at Tom's silly jokes during dinner, showed genuine curiosity about the books and games that filled the Collins home, and began displaying the natural enthusiasm and wonder that had been suppressed under his father's systematic control. Most significantly, Alex began asking questions about how families were supposed to work, about why some adults hurt children while others protected them, about whether his mother would be safe and whether he would ever see her again. These questions, while sometimes difficult to answer, represented crucial steps in his psychological healing and his developing trust in the adults working to help him. 2 weeks after Alex's rescue, Detective Park brought news that ensured Alex's permanent safety and began providing answers about his family's situation. David Thompson had been arrested at his workplace and charged with multiple counts of child abuse, child endangerment, and domestic violence. Evidence found during the search of his residence revealed a pattern of systematic abuse that included detailed documentation David had kept of his disciplinary methods, a disturbing record of escalating violence that he had apparently maintained as justification for his actions. More importantly for Alex's healing process, The investigation had revealed that his mother, Jennifer Thompson, had been systematically deceived and intimidated about the extent of Alex's discipline. David had convinced her that his methods were necessary for raising a well-behaved child and had threatened her with violence if she interfered with his parenting decisions. Medical records showed that Jennifer had suspected abuse but had been too frightened to seek help or report her concerns. What this means, Robert Kim explained during a meeting with Michael and the Collins family, is that Alex's mother is working with us to understand what happened and to make sure she can provide a safe home for him in the future. She's entered counseling and is taking steps to ensure David can never contact their family again. When they shared this news with Alex, his reaction was complex. Relief that his mother hadn't been complicit in his abuse, hope that he might be able to return to her care eventually, and growing understanding that his suffering hadn't been his fault. "So Mom didn't know Dad was hurting me so badly?" Alex asked, this question revealing how much guilt he'd been carrying about his mother's apparent indifference to his pain. "She knew something was wrong, but your father was very good at hiding how serious it was and making her afraid to ask questions," Sarah confirmed, showing Alex photographs of his mother meeting with social workers and counselors to understand the situation and begin planning for his care. "Your father scared her too, and convinced her that his way of disciplining you was normal." Alex studied the photographs with intense concentration, seeing evidence that his mother was actively working to understand his situation and provide for his protection rather than abandoning him as he'd been led to fear. "Will I be able to see her?" Alex asked hopefully. "Yes, once the counselors think it's safe for both of you and your mom has learned how to keep you completely protected," Tom assured him. "And until then, she knows you're safe and loved here with us." 3 weeks after his rescue, Alex had begun displaying remarkable resilience and healing capacity that amazed even the experienced professionals working with him. His natural creativity and intelligence, which had been channeled into survival strategies under his father's abuse, now flourished in the safe environment provided by the Collins family. Michael was completing his daily documentation when Alex appeared in his office doorway one afternoon, now wearing a comfortable long-sleeved shirt that he could remove or adjust as needed, a sight that filled Michael with profound satisfaction and hope. "Mr. Harrison, look what I made for you." Alex approached his desk with a detailed drawing that depicted a house surrounded by trees, with stick figures representing his foster family under a bright sun. In careful second-grade handwriting, he had written "Thank you for helping me be safe" across the bottom. "This is absolutely beautiful, Alex," Michael said, accepting the drawing with genuine admiration while feeling tears threaten to overwhelm his professional composure. "You look so happy in this picture." "I am happy," Alex declared with growing confidence, his voice carrying none of the fear that had characterized his speech during his months of suffering. "Tom and Sarah say I'm a good kid just the way I am, and they like having me as part of their family. And they're teaching me that making mistakes is just part of learning." The simple statement revealed how much healing had already occurred, Alex understanding that childhood should include normal learning processes rather than perfect compliance achieved through fear of violence. "They're absolutely right about you being a good kid," Michael confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. "You deserve to be happy and safe and loved exactly as you are." As Alex headed back to his classroom, moving with the relaxed confidence of a child who no longer feared punishment for normal behavior, Michael reflected on the transformation he'd witnessed. In the space of just weeks, a terrified, controlled child had become someone who could express genuine happiness, make personal choices, and trust in adult protection and care. 5 months later, Michael received news that filled him with professional satisfaction and personal joy. Alex's mother had successfully completed intensive counseling and had demonstrated consistent commitment to his safety and well-being. More importantly, she had taken legal steps to ensure David Thompson could never contact their family again and had relocated to a different city to create a completely fresh start for herself and Alex. "The transition has been wonderful," Robert Kim reported during their final case meeting. "Alex's relationship with his mother has been rebuilt on a foundation of complete honesty and safety. She understands now how to recognize warning signs and how to prioritize Alex's protection above all else." When Michael had his final visit with Alex before the boys moved to join his mother, his transformation was complete. He entered the office wearing casual clothes appropriate for the weather, his body language relaxed and confident, his face bright with the joy of a child who knew himself to be loved and protected. "Mr. Harrison, guess what?" Alex announced excitedly as Michael conducted a final check-in session. "Mom and I found a house near a really good school, and there's a playground right across the street where I can play with other kids." The gesture of trust and hope represented by Alex's excitement about normal childhood activities. His assumption that playing with other children would be fun rather than an opportunity for criticism or punishment represented the highest possible outcome for intervention in child abuse cases. "That sounds like the most wonderful adventure," Michael replied, completing their session while marveling at the complete transformation from the terrified child who had once hidden systematic abuse under a winter jacket worn in warm weather. 6 months after his rescue, Alex returned to visit Michael's office one final time, now living happily with his mother in their new city. He bounded through the door wearing a light sweater that he immediately removed and hung on a chair, demonstrating his complete comfort with normal clothing choices and environmental adaptation. "Mr. Harrison, I wanted to show you my report card," Alex announced proudly, displaying straight A's and teacher comments praising his kindness, creativity, and enthusiasm for learning. "And guess what else? I joined the soccer team, and Mom comes to all my games." The gesture of trust represented by Alex's pride in normal childhood achievements. His assumption that success would be celebrated rather than used as justification for higher, impossible standards, demonstrated his complete psychological recovery. "I'm so proud of you, Alex," Michael said, reviewing the excellent grades while feeling overwhelming joy at the complete transformation. "You're doing amazing things, and I'm so happy to see you thriving." Stories like these remind us that school counselors serve as crucial emotional guardians for vulnerable children, combining psychological expertise with compassionate observation to identify those suffering in silence behind carefully maintained facades. Every day, heroes like Michael are making these life-saving discoveries through attention to behavioral patterns that don't make sense and willingness to look beneath the surface when children's actions suggest hidden pain. But how many children are still concealing their trauma behind protective barriers, waiting for someone to care enough to help them remove the layers hiding their truth? Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more powerful stories of rescue and redemption. See you in the next one.